Barracks at West Point are named after military legends like Eisenhower and MacArthur. But a building due to open in 2 years will be named after Benjamin O. Davis. Davis was the only black cadet at West Point from 1932 to 1936 and the first of the 20th century. And during that time, he was shunned by his classmates. Our senior political producer, Karen McBride, visited West Point recently to learn more. Karen?
Thanks, Andrew. I sat down with Colonel Ty Sedulate, a decorated military veteran and head of the history department at the Military Academy. He explained what life here was like for Davis, how he went on to an impressive military career, and why the Academy is honoring him now. Colonel, Benjamin Davis entered West Point in 1932. He was the only black cadet, and basically he spent the next 4 years alone. Talk about the treatment, the silencing, if you will, and what that must have been like.
Well, when he came here in 1932, he came during a time when plebes were all treated poorly. So for a while, it seemed like his being treated was just part of what everyone else did. And then there was a time when one or two of his white classmates would talk to him. And then they had a meeting of cadets. In fact, they went and rapped on each door and said, "Would you, come down to the bathroom and let's talk about this." So he went down there as well, and it basically said, "What are we going to do with this guy?" Though in much more racist language than that. And they said, "We're going to silence him," which is what cadets did to people that had violated the honor code. And they silenced him, which meant they wouldn't talk to him except in performance of duties at any time. And he roomed alone. He had his tent alone when he was doing maneuvers. No one would talk to him. And it was a form of psychological torture.
But he also maintained a bit of a sense of humor. Upon his graduation, he wrote, "When my father told me of my many supporters, the many people who were pulling for me, I said, it's a pity none of them were at West Point."
He did have a sense of humor. He maintained that incredible dignity throughout his entire experience here and later in the Army Air Corps and in the Air Force. He was a man of extraordinary dignity, that he was able to do that throughout this 4-year experience at West Point, which he took later. Nothing was going to stop him from graduating from West Point, and that was what he said. And any time anybody gave him a hard time or was more racist to him, he would just catalog that and say, "They are not going to get me. I am going to succeed." And he graduated very high in his class. He's a brilliant man.
And you brought up his 1991 autobiography, and he wrote, "I was stubborn enough to put up with their treatment to reach the goal that I had come to obtain." And as you mentioned, he did obtain that. Now, he was not the first black cadet to graduate from West Point.
No, we had 3 that graduated in the 19th century. Henry O. Flipper was the first. And then Charles Young was the last in 1889. But at that time, then the Jim Crow laws came into being in America, which sort of took away the vote from African Americans in the South and led to the poor treatment and lynching that occurred for the next 50 years throughout American society. It wasn't just the Army, but the Army was a reflection of those terrible times in America as well. And so there was one cadet that was here in 1918 for about 6 months. He was run out, and then Benjamin O. Davis was the next one coming in 1932. So there's almost a 50-year gap in the graduation of an African-American cadet here. And there was a terrible report that came out in 1925 saying that African-Americans could not serve. They just weren't good enough to serve. And so many Army officers took that as gospel in a way, and that led to even more racist behavior after 1925. And he really came in the middle of that maelstrom, and yet somehow made it through.
Despite everything, he stayed the course. He went on to become commander of the Tuskegee Airmen. He was the first black general in the Air Force?
He was, first black general in the Air Force, that's right.
Talk a little bit about his career.
So Benjamin O. Davis, when he left here, wanted to serve in the Air Corps. He wanted to fly. That was his dream. And the Army Air Corps left in no uncertain terms that he couldn't do that. And the reason that he wasn't allowed to do that is because African-American officers were not allowed to be in command of white troops of any way, shape, or form. And so that meant that he had to go in just with those units that were all black. So he went to the 24th Infantry at Fort Benning, which was the only one that would allow him to serve. And when he went down there, the colonels of those regiments would not allow him in the house. He was an amazing amount of racism, because the senior officers, even in the black regiments, were all white. So he wanted to fly, was not allowed to fly. When World War II started, there was a double V campaign, which the double V meant that there's going to be victory against Nazis, victory against fascism abroad, but victory against racism at home. And so the African American community was very strongly trying to make sure that there were blacks flying as well. And so they started Tuskegee, which was in the middle of Alabama. I mean, they couldn't have put it in a place that would have been more difficult for blacks to learn to fly than in this area. And yet they still overcame that and learned to fly. And of course, we're great airmen. And then he took command of that organization that eventually went to Italy and had a great record flying. And when they went to Italy, they had this great record. He came back to take another command, and some of the senior people in the Army Air Corps said, you know, you shouldn't, we don't want any more black flyers because they can't do the job. And both Benjamin O. Davis Sr. and Jr. Reported to a commission and rebuffed that completely and said, no, we have done a great record, which they had done, a supremely good record in Italy, and they were continued to allow to fly during that period.
Didn't he play a key part in integrating the Air Force as well?
He did. In 1948, President Truman issued an order desegregating all of the armed forces. But because Davis was in the Army Air Corps during that time, and then the Air Force did it much faster than anyone else, and he helped set the conditions to make the Air Force truly integrate much faster.
And General Davis died in July of 2002. Now, posthumously, he's going to receive an incredible honor, something that's usually reserved for folks with stellar military careers, the likes of MacArthur and Eisenhower.
Right.
Now, I'm sure no one would argue that General Davis had a very impressive career, but might this honor be a little more related to his time here and sort of righting a wrong from the past?
No, I'll tell you why I say that. Our mission is to create leaders of character that embody the notion of duty, honor, country, so that they will serve their nation in uniform in the U.S. Army. And so we're here to develop leaders of character. That's what we do. And we couldn't think of anybody that had more character, that exemplified our notion of duty, honor, country than Benjamin O. Davis. It really is exemplified in how he was able to overcome racism and make both the Army, the Air Force, and American society a fundamentally fairer place. And he did this for his country at a time when his country treated him and everyone who looked like him as unequal.
You'll have a dedication ceremony, of course, for this. Will members of General Davis' family be here?
Yes. His nephew is commander of the Old Guard right now in Washington, is a colonel in the Army, and was a combat commander in Iraq. And we hope he'll come as well. But certainly members of the extended Davis family will be here. That's we hope they think it's an honor. We really couldn't do a higher honor for him. At other schools, the naming of dormitories isn't as big as the academic buildings. But here the barracks are a special, just as you mentioned, Grant, Eisenhower, Sherman. These are the greatest heroes in American military history and in American history, period. So to name it after him is a way for us to say, to recognize our finest. And with this, we're saying Benjamin O. Davis Jr. is our finest.
So Karen, any idea when West Point is set to have this building honoring General Davis open and ready?
They're expected to have it completed in January of 2017, and they're also planning now a dedication ceremony where they're going to invite members of General Davis's family.
That's terrific that they can honor his legacy and his memory along with the rest of the Academy. Karen McBride, thanks very much. We'll take a quick break here on RFL. When we come back, our Hudson Valley Headline.